Good evening and welcome to the Rebound Dog Sofa. I'm so pleased to welcome Mark Randall from the UK, Beverly Cuddy from the UK and Julie Mancusi from California on the topic of how does legislation actually impact on animals. And I'm going to go and ask each guest, I'll ask Mark to start as an introduction for the work that he does, which is absolutely fascinating, and then go ask Beverly for her insight on this animal innate tool that's very relevant to breed, what breeds are going to be here in the future. And then Judy comes in with some fascinating thoughts on how to address legislation in the States. So Mark, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, happily. Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, I've for decades, actually 3 decades, I was a police officer. I've been working with covert operations on terrorism, serious crime. Left policing 15 years ago and started training and investigating welfare issues around the world. I think 5 continents at the last count. Ukraine, Greece, the European countries, Eastern Europe, helping develop legislation, trying to make police officers, prosecutors and politicians understand why a war should be taken seriously and how it interacts with other criminal enterprise. So really I specialise, I suppose, in perpetrator motivation. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to meet up with like-minded colleagues today.
Thank you, that's great. Beverly, you have a fascinating background over 3-4 decades as well with Dogs Today magazine.
So I've lived a very long life already, it has to be said.
Me too.
Yes. Yeah, I've been involved in campaigning for legislation change for 35 years now. The first piece of legislation I was involved in was passports for pets, getting rid of quarantine, and been quite a few highlights since then. We were involved with Lucy's Law, getting the puppy out of the pet shop, and most recently in Rishi Sunak's government we got the pet abduction bill through on the very last day of his prime ministership. So some big ticks there. We've got a few over the line, but I'm always concerned. Every bit of new legislation, there's always a oh my goodness, is it going to make things better or worse? Because there's been lots of things that have been very hard to unpick when we've got them. So you just try and get the politicians excited, but you don't want them to start jerking their knees and doing really catastrophic things, which we then have to live with. So yeah, mixed bag.
Thank you. Judy, does that resonate what Beverly's just said about knee-jerk reactions with politicians in the States?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm Judy Mancuso, the founder, president, and CEO of Social Compassion in Legislation. And we work on state legislation out of Sacramento, California. I'm located here in beautiful Laguna Beach, California. And yes, we've sponsored over 80 bills, and we've gotten 30 signed into law, and which is a very big deal. And we had one pass the full assembly today. But yes, political wins have a lot to do with whether a bill ever gets introduced, if it passes. And it's very challenging getting legislators to care about animal issues when there is so much constantly going on for humans and children, the climate, everything else we're in competition with. But I'd like to think that we can work on multiple and all these important issues at the same time.
So, opening the question to 3 of you, picking on what Judy said about how there's competition of politicians' time, for listeners to the recorded podcast and those watching live, does anybody have any tips from their experience over the three decades or more that you'd recommend if you're trying to change legislation so it's relevant and it works on behalf of the animals?
Well, I can jump in there because I don't think anyone's as old as me. Those decades, what the politicians like is solutions, not problems, and them to be extremely cheap. So one where they'll get loved on the doorstep forever, so that's hugely popular. Will get them a rise in popularity, won't cost them anything. So you've got to pick your battles. You've got to find things that they will want to be aligned to that will make a difference. And you really need to make friends with your politician, get to know them, find out what their motivation is, and yeah, because they're humans. They want to feel happy. They want to feel like they've achieved something. They want their parents to be proud of them. This is their one chance, usually, where you can go cross-party and unite similar people and make them feel good about themselves. So you're doing a public service, really. You're making politicians loved. So it's quite a joyous thing. But the problem is, you make friends with all these politicians, and often the really best ones never get in again. They sort of drift in and out of politics. So it's a constant job making friends with MPs and hoping that they stay in the job long enough.
That's great, thank you. Mark, do you have any feedback on that side of the world?
Generally, the approach that I always take is try not to make it look like it's extra work. Everybody is always incredibly busy, and if what is being sold is going to create work, people generally don't like it. But if it's going to save work, it's going to save time, and it kind of goes on with the finance side of things that Beverly was just saying. If it's going to save, keep people safer, or it's going to save time, then you're more likely to get a buy-in rather than saying, we'd like you to do this as well as everything else.
And Judy, are you finding the same in California?
Well, yes, it's definitely education. When we first start talking about spaying and neutering animals and how that would help prevent and mitigate the pet overpopulation that we have, no one understood what we were talking about. This goes back to the year 2007. And what we did at that time is we asked the legislators to go on a tour of their local shelters. And once they got in the shelter and they understood what was happening and the strain on the employees, the cruelty to the poor animals that come through the front door, and, in some shelters, 80% of the time, would never find their way back out that door. We even took them into the euthanasia rooms to show them where the animals are put down because of no fault of their own, just the problem from the community on overbreeding. And it resonated, and then we found champions who then would carry the legislation and understood what we were talking about. So yes, it is about making friends. It is about education and popularity. Obviously, polling has a lot of weight. At the time, we did a poll for the state of California on how people felt about spaying and neutering animals, and if it saved lives and saved taxpayer money. They overwhelmingly, it was about 68% of the population were strongly for it, and well over that for the people who were, supported it. So when you have polling data and you educate and you have relationships, yes, that's a winning formula.
Thank you. And taking it back to a UK angle for the moment, I believe Mark's Nature Watch Foundation was a sponsor of this innate tool that Beverly's written recently about in Dogs Today magazine. Was the sort of, can you explain the sort of how that came about?
From my perspective, it's something that I've not been involved in. It's beyond my area of expertise.
Okay.
I'm about getting law enforcement, prosecutors, and politicians to start taking animal welfare seriously, and particularly when it interacts with human welfare. And I try and stay in my lane. I mean, I've been doing this 45 years, and I've got quite a broad knowledge. But one thing I have learned is don't start talking about stuff you don't know things about, and that's it's. Well, I mean, Nature Watch Foundation might be involved in it, but it's certainly nothing I'm aware of or have any expertise in.
Okay, great. Thanks for the honest feedback, because all too often, too many people think we need to be involved in every single aspect of every single bit of, say, animal welfare or whatever the subject is, whereas your shining example of what happens and why it's successful. Because I remember reading online where I believe there's a prosecution against an horrendous large dogfighting ring recently, so which is, I believe, is a great example of where specialism works.
I could talk to you about dogfighting for hours.
I thought you might.
Health assessments, no, that's way over my head. So yeah, organised crime, dogfighting, guns, narcotics. Yeah, that's my background. So very different.
Yeah, this is a topic for another conversation on another day. We'll come back to you on. Beverly, you wrote a large piece in Dogs Today recently about this tool. And I know you, in previous conversations we've heard, and you and I have discussed its value. Would you like to explain to the audience how you see it?
Yes, this is a really good idea, produced by amazing people. So it's what it was meant to be was a visual tool that you can just have on your phone, like an app, that had 10 points of exaggeration, so that when you were buying a dog, you'd go, instead of seeing cute, you would go, oh, actually, no, that's suffering, because some of the things that we've fallen in love with over the years have been not good for the dog's welfare. Now, we all know extreme suffering exists from dogs that can't breathe, can't do lots of normal things in life. And it's come from that motivation, this tool. Somebody has really tried hard to stop dogs being bred that are born to suffer. The problem is, it's been worked on religiously for 3 years behind closed doors, but without anyone who's ever bred a dog pretty much sitting at the table. So we've ended up with something in theory is a fantastic idea, but as soon as the breeders saw it, went, oh no, there's tremendous unintended consequences here. Because some of the 10 points that you look for would actually sum up nearly 40 breeds of dog that are living quite healthily as normal pets. So all the short-legged dogs that have been bred for hundreds of years to be pet dogs would fall into the trap of being, when you do this binary, has it got short legs? Is it this list of 10 physical qualities would get zapped. And the thing is that it's voluntary at the moment, but the fear is it's going to slip straight into legislation and become so that you cannot breed from, well, the number one most wanted dog in Britain at the moment, and you've got one of these yourself, I believe, is the Dachshund.
Correct.
The Dachshund has got short legs. This tool says that short legs bad. So you can't. You can. Theory is people would breed dogs with longer legs to get round the ban, but the problem is with the genetics of the Dachshund. You don't get just slightly short. You're going to get much longer legs. You're going to get they're actually very big dogs, Dachshunds, with short legs. And if you undo that bit of it's more complicated than it looks. And the dog breeders are all up in arms going, this is you can't just look at the physical of the dog. The dog is not just what you see. We're trying to teach people not to buy dogs because of the way they look. There's all sorts of other bits going underneath the surface, and if you start tweaking little bits here and there, you don't know what you're going to alter. And if you say you can breed any dog with any dog, which is what the theory is, it sort of, well, it undoes 300,000 years or whatever, 30,000 years of evolution, where dogs have evolved to do certain jobs. So a border collie is born to herd. Now, we know that the way it looks a certain way, but its brain is wired a certain way. If you mix that with a dog that's bred to guard or bred to do another job, you get this clash of things going on, and the public will end up, well, you're getting a very sort of murky soup. With the intention of getting rid of one problem, you may be causing lots of others. So it was not received well last night in Parliament. There was a lack of unity. There were people going, "This will never work." There were other people going, "We love it," and the fear is it's going to rush into legislation and chaos will ensue. And the Queens, the late Queen had corgis. The corgi would fail. And we've got, in the year when the Royal Kennel Club has been rebranded Royal, the idea of the corgi being erased from history, it's almost, the sort of thing that people get their heads chopped off for that sort of suggestion. It's going to be terribly unpopular with the general public. I don't think anyone's worked it out, and the politicians are going to have to go absolutely. They thought this was going to be a nice, real easy win. Oh, let's get rid of all the exaggerated dogs and all the scary things. And then when you think a future without Westies, without Scotties, without Dandy Dinmonts, Glenavy Terriers, the things that we like to be eccentrically British, there's not huge animal welfare problems with all those types of dogs. It was meant to be the dogs that couldn't breathe, the dogs that were really suffering. And it's just missed the mark, unfortunately.
Does this come down to my passion of mine? Is we tend to try and provide solutions in a box without actually involving the end user, and this happens on a lot of subjects. I've come off tack, but it happens in a lot of subjects like homelessness and poverty. Whereas we're not. And I wonder if this is going back to the idea of how do we make legislation work for the animals. Is this one of where somebody's tried to put something in a box? It's great, but putting it back to a personal point of view, yes, we have a miniature dachshund. He's technically still fostered till next week. He is he's not rescued. He's not adopted at the moment because he came with one eye. He came on Christmas Eve, and he came because we've had 2 pedigrees before. Yes, we've had one that had back problems and he didn't have a slip disc. His disc disappeared, literally disappeared, and he had fantastic surgery. And my wife spent months doing physio, so he ended up about 95. So there is issues with dachshunds. And this one, we believe, he was born with one eye, and we couldn't work out why. So we did some research very briefly, and we think it's where a breeder, unscrupulous or uneducated, has tried to exploit the male thing, which I see as number 1 on that innate tool spectrum, and Dachshunds is 8 or 9 as miniature short legs. So they were trying to create a male, and I believe, I need to do further research, I think if you try and create 2 males, it's like an XY chromosome in my layman's language, where the fallout, and it goes back to your point, Beverly, of what happens when we stop trying to put long legs into a dachshund, for instance, in your comment. What's going to happen? Well, this is what happened. So he's now going to live for the rest. He's sewn up. He's never had an eyeball. And we're waiting for so there is. Yeah. It's this thing. I'll bring Judy and Mark back in again. It's how do we make sure that legislation, going back to the top, is it works and isn't just a tick box piece of paper that goes through a early day motion and then goes through Parliament in the UK and otherwise in the States. How do we actually make sure that it's absolutely relevant?
We go through great lengths to get all the stakeholders involved. One bill that I worked on that we are doing a continuation of it this year had 35 stakeholders that we tried to get from, the shelter world, veterinarians. It's very different for us in California. We do not promote getting dogs, cats, rabbits from breeders. We are begging people to adopt the shelter animals first and foremost because we literally are killing, euthanizing a couple 100,000 a year or more. We don't have final statistics on it because they stopped being kept because of lobbying from the breeders and the kennel clubs. So we have a real situation here that the kennel club usually does not come to the table, and they want to fight any legislation that tries to raise the bar and standardize breeding in any way or spay and neutering. So I've done several bills that would have specify what is a bona fide breeder, what should they have to make them legitimate. And those bills have died, and some haven't even gotten a first hearing because of the noise that gets generated from their side, that they don't want any lights shined on them. And, the money is kind of like drug money. A lot of these breeders take cash and it's all under the table. So it's a very bad situation. And so it doesn't surprise me that this is controversial in the UK, because we've never been able to get breeders to get on the same page of anything before. So, but other stakeholders, yes, like I said, the shelter community, the rescue community, the veterinarians, they are good to come to the table because they are rescuing and kind of picking up the pieces and cleaning up the mess. But the people creating the mess haven't been willing to come to the table.
I think
No,
that
I,
that's
I
very interesting. Oh, cool. Sorry, go on. Sorry, I'm jumping in. Go on.
no, I'm just going to try and keep this very briefly and succinct. And it's a shame that Christina couldn't be here today. But Christina's a barrister who's working on something called Ruby's Law, which crosses over with what I'm looking at in relation to protect animals, protect people, and at the moment how animals are used within domestic abuse. So the legislation that she's looking at is looking to get animals included within things like domestic violence prevention orders and domestic violence protection notices. Now, with human laws, with laws that impact on humans, they should be survivor-led. So, we have got a survivor with domestic abuse. We've got a survivor network. They are the ones that really should drive where that litigation goes, because that's who we're protecting. As soon as we start protecting animals, obviously unfortunately we can't go and talk to them and say, what law would you like? So we then have to be their guardians. We have to speak up for those animals. And certainly what I've noticed with animal welfare, different people have different perceptions on what animals would say if they had a voice. So we are their voice, but we have to try and, it's difficult to be an animal's voice, clearly, isn't it? Because do we really know what they want? And that's where the ethics become really tough around animal welfare legislation. Human legislation is tough enough, but at least we've got victims, survivors, victims of crime. We can go out and say, does this work for you? We can't go and ask a Labrador or a Dachshund or whatever, does this work for you? We have to make an assessment. And therefore, that's where we have the struggles. That's what I've seen. And actually legislation should be the same. It should protect everybody. It should protect everybody in the community. The angles that I go with is, animals are part of our community and our families and our relationships. And litigation should protect everybody in that community, including the animals.
I think that's a very good point. This idea of if we protect the dog, in most things, and you work it backwards, it all works out. But it's difficult because everyone's got their own idea of what the dog wants. So at the heart of this IHA is suffering and the legal definition of what suffering is. And that's quite hard to get your head around, really, because on its broadest interpretation, it's being extrapolated that a dog with short legs is suffering because it hasn't got the same length of leg as a Labrador. Now, does the dog with the short legs know that it could have been a Labrador? Or is it happy in itself and is it not in any pain? Where do you put the line as to what is suffering? Is it suffering for the way we want the dog to look? What I think is interesting in this crisis that's kind of developed is that all of the breeders have run towards being united to actually have a voice and to be at the table and to start interacting with the legislation, because previously we've been regarding the breeder as as slightly vilified as being an evil person that we can't control or in any way deal with, and that's impossible to change behavior if you can't interact with people. So if you can find the good in a sector, the ones that set out to be ethical, the ones that do the health tests, that know that you can't make two moles together because it's a lethal gene, because they're intelligent. They know that this is wrong. What we have is a lawless country at the moment where there are so few people who are regulated. There are so few licensed breeders. There's less than 3,000. There's no controls. People are able to wander in and out of the sector with no knowledge, with just profit in mind, and think, oh, Merle, dapple. They don't know it's Merle. They think dappled coloured Dachshunds are so attractive. Let's breed more of them. Let's breed them together, without knowing that dapple is Merle. Merle is not a colour, it's a coat pattern that has catastrophic problems if you have it on both sides. You can get the lethal gene that causes blindness, deafness, all sorts of horrible things. If you've only got one Merle to anything else, you've got no problems whatsoever. Now, if you allow people who know nothing at all about dogs to start mating them together, you're going to have lots of problems in society. You're going to have rescue full of rejects, rescue full of, because they don't give whole of life care. They just look at selling those puppies as soon as possible. You want to get rid of all those transient people who could sell anything, could sell, knockoff clothes on eBay. Let's move them out of the dog sector. Let's professionalise, get some standards in, elevate the good people, involve them in the new legislation, and then you get compliance. You get people who aspire to be good, and then you start having the beginning of every dog's life less chaotic. If you only bring dogs into the world that are wanted, planned, are healthily reared, brought up to be good pets that are house trained and get whole of life aftercare, we won't have any dogs in rescue, and we'll all be happy, and we'll all, it's never going to happen. But if that's where we aspire to, if we move towards this of making it so that dog breeders aren't shady, dog breeders aren't, and even the best dog breeders at the moment, if they go on holiday, they don't tell anyone they're a dog breeder because they get treated like they're a terrorist. The public hate them. We need to create a new class of ethical small breeder that we interact with, because the ethical small breeder is the friend of the ethical rescue. They're all on the same side. They all want the best for their dogs. And we want to get rid of the people who are in our sector who are causing chaos. So if one thing we learned yesterday in Parliament, it was that there is such a sector as the ethical small breeder, and it's because they feel squashed. They've got together and they've become a voice. And we've had 3,000 people join a union of good dog people since Christmas Day. Never happened before. So in chaos, you get hope.
Well, I'd like to, if you don't mind, speak to both Mark's point about protecting animals and humans alike, and I'd like to speak to Beverly's points as well. I'd like to offer some words of encouragement as far as getting legislation passed that has to do with abuses to the family and family members. We did pass a bill, it was SB 221, that adds pets to the stalking crime. This was brought forward by Riverside County DA's office, actually, where they wanted to include pets into stalking because they had instances where there was threats to a woman's pet, and if they were able to stop it with the animal before it led to the animal's death, and even in some cases the death of the human as well. So we did get that law passed, and we got another law passed, which was AB 829, which encourages judges to order a psychological exam on people who are convicted of animal abuse crimes. And the reason for this is because psychologically there is a link with people who abuse animals and also abuse humans, that those two are intertwined, and that there's way too much proof. So if someone is abusing animals, we need to take a look at them and try to intervene that we can prevent them from going on and committing heinous acts to humans. Going to what Beverly is saying about ethical breeders versus puppy mills, we wanted to make that differentiation, but we haven't been able to because we haven't been able to get any breeders to work with us. They just want to shut down legislation, and it's mostly just pure exploitation. It's about making the most money. If you sell a dog for $2,000 or $3,000 and you don't want any kind of oversight or regulation, and like I said before, some of this money is just cash. So what happens in our case at the legislature is we have the breeding community and the rescue community on different sides of the issue. We want them to be on the same side of the issue, but it ends up that they fight with us on everything that we try to do to advance and legitimize dog breeders and try to bring down this pet overpopulation problem. And so what happens at the legislature is what they see is animal people fighting animal people, and they get confused and then they just want to run away. They don't want to vote on the bill. They don't want to take sides. They don't completely understand it. So I really hope, Beverly, the UK actually makes this happen so that we have a model to point to. Um, you know, there are people who will always want a purebred. Yes, we want them to adopt first and foremost, but at the end of the day, it's sort of like I'm vegan and I would wish everybody was vegan, but I know that's not going to happen. If I could get 20%, 80% of the population, it would be a huge movement. And same with the dog breeding community. If we could get them to play ball with us, that to, establish what is an ethical breeder. It is somebody that puts the animal first and not profit. And that's the big, you know, line in between what's good and bad. And I think Beverly might understand a little bit more of what I'm referring to as well.
I think it's a very very sound point, and that's what my whole life I've spent trying to get rid of puppy farming, because I really don't think dogs retail well. They're family. You're not meant to have them mums as breeding slaves. It's a horrible life. It's just so cruel. And it's so obvious that dogs should be bred by people who love them, and mum should have a full life outside of breeding, should be rarely bred. So we should have local community breeders who stay in touch with you for the whole of your dog's life. That dog's family should go from a loving family to a loving family. It should be done on small scale to the best of everybody's abilities, and that it should be something that is done as the most important job in the world. You are creating a family member for somebody, and that the new people who buy dogs need a new way of thinking, just like we've changed the way we check the provenance of the food we eat, that so many more people are vegetarian, so many more people are vegan. New dog lovers must see that the mother of their puppies deserves a life, and they should only buy from ethical breeders that ensure mum has a full loved life, and that this new generation of breeders, they will breed rarely, and they will give 8 weeks time to bringing those puppies up to be house trained, to be good dogs, to be well socialized, and they will join all the people who've got the brothers and sisters into like a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group, where they'll stay in touch with each other for life, and they will come back together every year for a birthday walk, where it is the dog is family. And that's so much more exciting to a new pet owner to get because it's like an adoption of a child. The dog is part of your family. You should be so careful where you get it from, and that we should make that the aspirational way to breed dogs, so that those people who do it in scale for huge sort of, well, grimy profit, with horrible fallout, with all their unsolds going to be remaindered and dumped in rescue. I mean, it's a horrible waste of life. These dogs are the most precious things in the world. It should be only people doing it exceptionally well. Every puppy that's brought into this world, you should have a moral obligation to give it the best start in life, and to be there throughout its life if that person gets into any trouble. And one of the things that our union members have joined together to say is a pledge that puts all these values down, but also says that for every puppy sold, a donation would be made into a fund, so that if the breeder cannot fulfill their obligations to that puppy, and we want them to be on their microchip for life as the rescue backup, the breeder. So it's a different way of seeing how you buy a puppy. There would be a donation with like a puppy tax that goes into a pot for crisis, so that these dogs are never a burden to rescue. Just revolutionize, disrupt the way dogs are bought and sold worldwide. This should be the model for how every puppy buyer should stop buying from places that don't look after mum. We should just excite the new families that want to welcome a dog into their home to buy in a different way. Because if you turn the tap off it, because it's the money that makes these people breed dogs so badly. We've found that this group of very small, previously unconnected people, who they can be breeding crosses, they can be breeding pedigrees, they have all got the same love of the dog at their heart, not the love of money. Because there should be a fair price for a fair job, but you can make money in other ways much more easily than you can by breeding dogs. This should not be a profit-led business. It should be an ethical, aspirational dream job where you are making people so happy because the puppy you give to them is just so ready to be a good dog. So I'm excited that after 35 years of cleaning up the mess of the chaos that is in our dog sector, I can now see a glimmer of hope that this model may actually take off, because the public, if they know this exists, and if the small local breeders are given legislation that allows them to do it well in a domestic situation where the dog is in the home and is loved and is not in the shed, then what's there not to love about it? And, these are people who want to do every health test, who want to go further There's a new DNA test that in one swab can find everything about that dog, every disease, not even ones that we don't yet know are there. So we'll do the whole dog sequence. There's some amazing American ladies I spoke to the other day who went to Stanford who are geniuses. We are that close to getting a single DNA swab that will mean you could see in advance new diseases if you put those two dogs together. So you can just not do that. I mean,
Wow.
what a brilliant time to be born. We might sort out some dog problems soon, and I'm hoping this idea spreads around the world.
That is absolutely fascinating, Beverly. If we look at the key question, how does legislation impact? What you're foreseeing is a time where I won't say legislation isn't necessary, but it has, maybe it's not so necessary. And I'm not being very woo-woo on that. I'm just saying short version this time because we're running late. We did have one question, if I can find it again, and you've answered a lot of it altogether. And it came from a guy called Will Hodgetts. He's no relation, I found out. And he said, how much, to quote, how much the gap in animal welfare do you think is down to legislation itself? And how much is about education, enforcement, and public understanding of what good welfare actually looks like? And as I'd like to wrap up on the hour, I'd like to go round and ask each of you to think, what's your understanding, especially on the last bit about public understanding of what good welfare actually looks like? Are we missing a point? Are we missing the fact that the public don't understand what good welfare, animal welfare looks like at the moment?
Who would you like to go?
Jump in there go on, Judy.
No, go ahead. I was wondering who you wanted to go first.
Oh, I was just going to, I left it open. Go, Mark.
Well, shall I jump in there? I spoke to a Greek vet one time and just told me very, very simply, obviously, that abuse starts where welfare ends. And I quite like that. And it's something that I've always worked with. And when you're trying to get enforcement, if you want enforcement done, you need to make it simple because everybody's, I mentioned this before, everybody's really busy. Mm-hmm. So the simpler the law, the simpler you can create something, the better it is. And I'm fascinated listening to what Judy's saying about those different pieces of legislation because, picking up on the DNA issues that Beverly was saying, all around the world, there's some fantastic practices. Greece has legislation now which actually really means that all owners have to put their DNA for their dogs on the database. So you can actually look at familial DNA and see who's breeding what and whatever. So Greece has got some great legislation there. European Union is requiring all states to put in place the recognition of an animal abuse and domestic abuse by 2027. Ukraine in 2019, the Governor Rad passed that into the legislation. There's obviously some great work going on in America that Judy's doing. So pulling all this together, there's some great legislation there, and it's only as good as the enforcement will be. But you have to keep it simple. Complex legislation that nobody understands won't be enforced, and there has to be education with the enforcement. You talk about puppy farming. It's unbelievably complicated. It's split all around the country. Everybody's got different policies and practices. I mean, who's responsible for puppies in each council is completely different. You need some standardisation. You need to, it's a bit of a minefield to go through. But there is some really, really good practice all around the world. And, the one thing I've learned is don't think we've got it right. Let's have a look at somebody else doing it in a better way than we could do it. And if you do, be big enough to say, okay, let's borrow that. Canada's got some great legislation now on animal sexual abuse. Is a big issue that I've been looking at. Let's follow who's doing let's not be too proud to say another country's doing it better than we are.
I'll go next, and I love learning from others, and that's why it was a no-brainer for me to come on with you all today, Spencer. And I really appreciate you inviting me on.
You're
because
welcome.
We do look to the European Union and everywhere for whatever laws that we can follow within the United States. But what I say to this question is, you have to have a law on the books in order to enforce anything. So, somebody will say, oh, well, why another law when, we can't enforce what we have? Well, we won't even have an opportunity to enforce it if we don't put it on the law books. So that's number one. Number two, I have seen voluntary compliance on laws that put into place just because people want to do the right thing. They want to be law abiding. So you cannot discount how many people you'll have following the law completely by voluntary compliance. And so then comes the enforcement factor. And back to Mark's point, yes, people need to know who is enforcing it. Is it a DA? Is it the local city council, our county supervisors, the police, animal control? And making it as simple and straightforward as possible. And then there comes, obviously funding. That's one of the things that we're constantly fighting over, is trying to get these departments funded, because a lot of times animal control is the last on the list. Or in our case with the district attorney's office, they will be convicting gang members and other criminals before the animal abuser. So to me, putting the legislation on the books is number one, getting that voluntary compliance and education component, and enforcement as well. So that's my answer to that. Thank you.
And Beverly, would you like to wrap up?
Okay. I think it's interesting to see, I think it takes you a long time to see the whole picture. I mean, in the early days, I was so delighted that we'd get a petition through to get it discussed at Parliament. You'd see, your legislation come through, and then you don't actually get it enforced at all. You get something through that's fantastic, but you don't actually change the world. It takes you a while to start stepping back to see actually how do you make change in society. And this idea of compliance, you have to make being good for dogs good for people. You have to make it fun to do it properly. You have to make it rewarding to do it properly. You have to change, you have to be a human psychologist really to work out how to change behavior by making doing it well more rewarding than doing it badly. And then you can start enforcing to get rid of the bad characters who will not be community minded and will not look after the dog or all the vulnerable people, because it's the same people that are exploiting the animals who are exploiting the people. There are bad characters out there, and we need laws that stop them from abusing the vulnerable. They will pick on the dogs, they will pick on the people. They will not see any difference. We know the link, don't we? We all know the link. So you have to find a way for the good to thrive, who will look after the dogs and will look after the people and keep them protected from the really bad characters. And you have to step back far enough to not just be sort of chopping at the bad people. You have to encourage the good to become the majority. You have to make it so that the good people can rise to the top and feel empowered, and that the public can have the feeling of being morally that they're doing the right thing. You have to make it easy for them to get it right. You have to show them a different way, because dogs are like cocaine to people, aren't they? You look into the dog's eyes, their brain goes completely, they lose all critical theory, they just do the wrong thing, act with the heart, not with the head. We need to protect the next generation of people so that they have good experiences with the animals in their lives, and that we build a society where everyone respects each other and respects the animals. Um, we'll never sort society out if we allow people to exploit the vulnerable. So I'm cheering you guys on with all the efforts you're doing, because it needs doing. I'm trying to help the puppies. I've got the jolly job here of trying to sort out the beginning bit at the moment, because this is I think the easiest job in the world, to convince the general public to stop buying dogs that die, that are falling apart and feeling really bad about themselves. Start making ethical choices, and ethical breeders, be proud of what you do. And legislators, these people exist. Make it easy for them to do it in their home. At the moment, there's a rule that a domestic house can only have 5 dogs in it. Now, if you're going to keep your oldies, you're going to have more than 5 dogs. And legislation at the moment is forcing people to get rid of their older dogs and put them into rescue. What's that about? We don't want people breeding dogs who are not going to keep their oldies. You want people who love dogs breeding dogs. We need legislation that encourages people who love dogs to produce dogs, and keeping the people who don't away from them.
And on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much to Judy Mancuso, Beverly Cuddy and Mark Randall. Your conversation has been fascinating, and I sincerely hope that our Sofa podcast listeners learned loads, because I certainly did. I'm going to say thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
For futures untold, Rebound Dog, where stories unfold.